I'm so happy to be celebrating the new moon tomorrow and the solar eclipse with all of you. I know folks are getting their devices set up and their audio connected. So we're going to give folks a couple moments to just arrive and get the technology going. That's always takes a bit of, even though we're all probably Zoom professionals by this point, it still takes a minute to get things connected and set up. So we'll just give folks a minute to arrive. We'll get started about 5:03. In the meantime, it's so nice to see some familiar faces. Hi, Sally. Hey, Cindy. Nice to see you. Nice to see some new faces too. We're just going to give friends a chance to arrive here. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. Hi, Victoria. While we're waiting for everyone to settle and gathering our energy in this space, I invite you to drop in the chat where you're from. And if you have any celestial comments or questions that you want to share, feel free to drop those in the chat. I'm coming to you today from unceded Abenaki territory called Central Vermont, from a sweet little mountaintop called Sage Mountain, about 2,000 feet elevation on a 600-acre property in the middle of 80,000 acres of contiguous roadless forest. So I'm going to call in my gratitude and thanks for all of the electronic internet fairies that allow us to have a sweet little circle like this, tuning in from all different parts of the world. Hi, Victoria. Thanks for staying up late to be with us. Nice to have you. So I was inspired to just offer a time for us to gather and connect. I know that we have all probably had lots of Zoom gatherings, and they're certainly not a substitute for gathering in person, but they do let us from all corners of the world get to connect. And tomorrow we have a solar eclipse that will affect us in all parts of the world, no matter where we're at. And I just wanted to take a minute to celebrate it and to share what it's about and some of the tools and rituals and practices that I'll be using to both weather the eclipse and some of the challenging energies that might come through, but also, I think more importantly, to embrace and take advantage of some of the gifts that eclipses bring, to really not just survive the eclipse season that's approaching now, but to thrive and to make the most of it, and also to glean from it reflections for what might be happening in our life right now, so that we can really tune in to those events, as well as to connect to past eclipse seasons and to really make those connections between past eclipses and this eclipse. And so I recognize some of my students from my Moon Medicine course, my year-long course, and I'm so glad you could jump in and join today. And for new friends, this is my father was a botany and an astronomy professor, so I like to think that I have my head in the sky a lot, but my feet on the ground, pretty well rooted. And so my Moon Medicine course and a lot of the work that I do as an herbalist is really kind of centered around that perspective of how can we understand how the celestial bodies and beings are influencing us here on Earth, and then put that into practical application. I also sort of like to weave and dance between the two worlds of astronomy and astrology, and science and spirit. So for the next half hour or so, that's sort of what we'll be diving into. I know some of you, especially if you're a Moon Medicine student, have probably heard a lot of the basic concepts that I'll be sharing today, but I do want to start right at the beginning for new folks on the call, and it's always good to do a little bit of review as well. So I just want to thank you all if you've come in the last few minutes. My name's Emily Ruff. I'm really honored to spend this time with you. This is intended just to really be a brief sharing of what's happening in the stars and in the sky tomorrow with the new moon solar eclipse. I hope that it answers some questions and maybe also piques some interest for deeper learning and deeper explorations. If you haven't and you feel called, I welcome you to drop in the chat where you're tuning in from, as well as if you have any burning questions. This is just a brief gathering circle up today. So we may not have a lot of time for Q&A, but I'm going to drop in the chat my email address for moon related questions. So if there's something that is on your heart or a concept that I talk about today that you don't feel fully clear about, you're welcome to email me later. So new moon, partial solar eclipse in the sign of Scorpio happening tomorrow. The new moon is new, properly exact, at 6:49 a.m. Eastern time in the US. And the solar eclipse will be taking place at 7:00 exact in East Coast time in the US. So 6:49, the moon is precisely new, and at 7:00 properly, the solar eclipse will be taking place. So let me back up. Let me rewind here. What is an eclipse? Well, and let me tell you, today I'm going to talk about what eclipses are astronomically, what they are astrologically, and how to work with that energy to gain the most gifts and to navigate any challenges, what solar eclipses are in distinct from lunar and how to work with those, generally speaking, and then specifically what this new moon solar eclipse in Scorpio is going to be all about. So astronomically speaking, the word eclipse etymologically comes from a Greek word which means cease to exist or fail to appear. And it also has connection to a French word that means an abandonment. And I love thinking about both of those definitions for an eclipse. Ceasing to exist or failing to appear, sort of the physical experience that we have when we look in the sky and the sun suddenly is shadowed and fails to appear, or the moon is covered and fails to appear. But I also love reflecting on the French word abandonment, because I think about eclipses as times that we may abandon things that no longer serve us. I think about eclipses a lot, and a lot of cultures, especially ancient traditions, think about eclipses in terms of cycles of death and rebirth. So a letting go, an abandonment. Lunar eclipses happen when the Earth moves between the sun and the moon and throws the moon into shadow. And conversely, solar eclipses happen when the moon moves directly in between the Earth and the sun, blocking our view of the sun. So I'm going to show, let's see if I do this right. There we go. Can you all see my screen and a little diagram of solar eclipse and lunar eclipse? Thanks. Thumbs up. Love it. So the solar eclipse is when the moon has moved between the Earth and our view of the sun, and it shadows it. And this new moon solar eclipse is going to be a partial eclipse. So the angle of the sun and the moon and the Earth is going to be such that it's not fully in shadow, it's only partially in shadow. So conversely, a lunar eclipse is kind of the opposite. The Earth has then moved in between the sun and the moon, and the Earth is shadowing the sun's light as it reflects from the moon. So what we're going to see tomorrow morning, we won't see it in the US or in the UK, actually. There'll only be parts of like the Southern Hemisphere that see it, is a partial shadowing of the sun as viewed from the Earth. So lunar, I show you this depiction. Tomorrow is a solar eclipse, but I show you both the lunar and the solar because lunar and solar eclipses always occur in pairs. So tomorrow, October 25th, we have the new moon solar eclipse, and we will experience a full moon lunar eclipse on November 8th. And so you might have caught there that the solar eclipse is on a new moon and the lunar eclipse is on a full moon. That is always the pattern. Lunar eclipses always take place in alignment with a full moon, and solar eclipses always take place in an alignment with the new moon. And that's because this arrangement of shadowing, where the moon is between the sun and the Earth, or the Earth is between the sun and the moon, is actually the same arrangement that we see on full moon and new moon periods. If you were to, step back out in the universe and look into our little galaxy, that would be the alignment you see. But the Earth has a 5% tilt to our axis. And that means that we don't have an eclipse every new moon and full moon. If our axis was straight up and down, horizontal, 100% or 0 degrees, as it were, then we would have an eclipse every new moon and every full moon. But we only get it a few times a year because of that angle. So there is this concept called lunar nodes that I also want to touch on, that hopefully you can see in this little diagram here. So I mentioned that the alignment of the sun, the moon, and the earth is roughly the same every new moon and full moon, but we don't have an eclipse every single new moon and full moon because of that tilt in the axis. There is something called the ecliptic plane, and that is our orbit around the sun. And that orbit also matches up with, sort of from our view of the earth, the different zodiac signs, the constellations in the sky. And because of that, about 5% tilt of our axis off of the ecliptic, we only see the eclipses a few times a year, and it's when the moon is reaching what are called the north node and the south node. And those nodes are the points at which our little tilt in our axis lines up with the plane of our orbit around the sun. So those of you that can conceptualize geometry, this is all sort of like geometry equations. So there are a few times a year, it's usually 2 to 3 times a year, that as we're moving around the sun, our position on the ecliptic matches the lunar nodes, the north or the south node, in a way that we are allowed, that eclipses are made possible. So that is why we don't have an eclipse every new moon or every full moon. And we have it maybe 2 or 3 times a year, depending on the calendar year. Everyone feel okay with that concept so far? So the other thing to think about with the ecliptic is that I mentioned that's the same sort of plane of orbit in which we view constellations from the planet, that we have grouped into a collection that we call the zodiac, thousands of years ago. Of all the probably thousands of beautiful constellations, 12 of them were chosen because they fall along this ecliptic plane that we see on Earth up in the sky. So that's Aries and Taurus and Gemini and Cancer and Leo and Virgo and Libra and Scorpio and Sagittarius and Capricorn and Aquarius and Pisces, and my students can correct me if I forgot one. I think I got most of them. So I bring that up, this zodiac connection, because the lunar nodes are always positioned in association with zodiac signs. And the moon sits in that nodal position for about 18 months. And then the relationship of the zodiac and the moon moves a little bit. So for 18 months, those nodes are associated with 2 of the constellations in that zodiac plane. And it just so happens that right now, the nodes are sitting in the signs of Taurus and the signs of Scorpio. So the partial solar eclipse tomorrow is in the sign of Scorpio. The lunar eclipse that will happen on the full moon, the total lunar eclipse, will be in the sign of Taurus. 6 months ago or so, in April and May, we had eclipses in Taurus and in Scorpio because the nodes were still in those zodiac signs. So we usually have either 2 or possibly 3 cycles of eclipses that sit in the same 2 signs. The same node position takes place. So we had eclipses in April and May that were in Taurus and Scorpio, and we had eclipses in this 2-week cycle that are in Taurus and Scorpio. When 2 zodiac signs are sitting in the north node and the south node with the moon, we call that an axis. It's sort of like the polar opposites, if you will, of a wheel of the zodiac. So right now we're in a Taurus and Scorpio axis. So if you hear an astrologer talk about that term, that's just what that means, is that one's in the north node and one's in the south node. A couple other astronomical things just to mention about eclipses. The Earth is a much bigger celestial object than the moon. So when the Earth moves in between the sun and the moon during a lunar eclipse and shadows the surface of the moon, then that can take a few hours. It can be a longer process. Whereas solar eclipses are shorter processes. They sometimes are only a few minutes long because the moon is smaller than the sun. Eclipses also are only viewed on certain paths or tracks of the planet because the sun is on one side of the planet for half the day and the moon is on one side, the other half. So even though we may not be able to see an eclipse, like we won't be able to see the solar eclipse happening tomorrow, the energetic influence is really felt all across the planet because it's still happening. We just are on the side of the planet that's not facing it. We don't get to see it. So even if you hear about, an eclipse happening in Australia or Antarctica and you can't see it, trust that the energetic influence, the sort of astrological influence of the eclipse will still be present for you. So then what is that influence? What are eclipses astrologically? Virginia Rosenberg, who's an astrologer that I follow, talks about eclipses as turning points. Like that's the key word that she likes to use, turning points. And I think that is a perfect way to think of them. They have long been associated with change, transformation. I mentioned that a lot of ancient cultures, when the sun was shadowed, it was this epic experience, and it was always associated with death and with rebirth and with significant types of change. I believe, and a lot of astrologers talk about the changes that come with eclipses being changes that are often already on their way or have already started. The seeds for these changes have already been planted. You generally may have a surprise or sudden change. It's not like you may be totally aware, but the events that transpire to bring forth change during an eclipse event tend to have already started to happen. So generally speaking, like relationships, for example, relationships that are having challenges and struggles sometimes might find their parting ways during an eclipse. But generally the issues, the root of those issues didn't just start with the eclipse. They generally started in a previous time. Or maybe you decide to take a leap and make a major career change during an eclipse, but you probably have been unhappy in your current job for a while, things like that. So the change itself may sort of birth forth with the transformative energy of the eclipse, but generally the seeds for it were planted already. So that's true for solar eclipses and for lunar eclipses. And you may expect, sort of on a general level during eclipse season, to receive unexpected news. It could be really good news. It could be difficult news. You may expect to have a beginning or an ending of something come your way, a project, a friendship, a relationship, a belief, or a behavior, or a pattern. If you have been, let's say, having a longing to start a new workout routine, don't start it on January 1st, the new year, like everyone else does. Join the gym on a moon solar eclipse. Like that's when the energy in the cosmos is really conspiring to make sure that you're not just going to drop out of your membership after the first month or something like that. Like big beginnings or endings, making changes, letting go of habits. If you've been thinking, oh, I, want to give something up or release something, eclipse seasons are really supportive for that. Eclipse seasons also tend to be times when truths are revealed and shadows are illuminated. And this might be something you receive like news from the outside, or this might be an internal truth. A lot of times I find like sort of reflections, like personal reflections, self-development type things like that come up unexpectedly during eclipse times. I just had a connection to something. I was driving home from the American Herbalist Guild conference last night, and I just was like making some connection to something random while I had a couple hours to drive. Like in my head, I had this sort of epiphany about some childhood thing that was connecting to now. And I was like, how did I like put that together? Where did that piece of information come from? How have I never thought about how these events connected? And then I was like, oh yeah, there's an eclipse tomorrow. So that's probably that sort of truth being revealed. Generally speaking, and pretty consistently, I would say that emotions are high. Our emotions tend to eclipse our logic and our reason. So I think that's a worthwhile thing to be aware of and to prepare for. I will also say that these experiences, you tend to experience them when the eclipse season is happening, the 2 weeks of the new moon to full moon time when the eclipses are happening. But it may also be that these are showing up for you a few weeks after. So it's not just tomorrow's new moon eclipse until the full moon eclipse on November 8th, and then you're done. You might be getting some unexpected news well into mid-November or late November, or you may be having some, inspired reflections throughout the end of that month. That's pretty standard. I think of solar eclipses as times for setting new intentions and starting new things, whereas I see lunar eclipses as times for tying up loose ends, endings of things, completion, and processing. So whether it's a solar or a lunar eclipse, there's a couple tips I'd like to share that I work with personally to, again, receive the benefits and really glean the gifts and navigate some of the challenges that can come up during that time. First of all, practicing balance, I think, is key and is something we're all always striving for, but I think is even more helpful to try to prioritize during this time. And I say that because I think, as I mentioned, our emotions tend to eclipse our intellect during eclipse periods, and it is very easy for us to react quickly, to say things that we can't take back. Or to, take actions that we later on in hindsight maybe wish we had done something differently. But the only way to practice restraint in our, impulsive emotional reactions is to feel more in balance and more grounded. So when I'm talking to students about eclipse season, I'm always talking about going to sleep a little earlier and being really hydrated and canceling a social plan to give yourself some time at home if that's your vibe, or making a social plan to go see some friends if that's your vibe. Really, whatever you can do to support yourself and to take care of yourself, give yourself a little extra love and a little extra self-care. For me, I'm a little more introverted. So that means practicing more time for myself, knowing that giving myself that time, in the evenings or in the mornings, just to myself to play with my kitties or do some art or walk in the woods or whatever it looks like, that's how I can nourish myself so that when an emotional event occurs, I have a little bit more ability to practice restraint and balance and not just spit out words, that I'm thinking, but I might wish later I hadn't said out loud. I also encourage my students to create a little bit of time to actively work with the eclipse. So what I mean by that is setting aside half an hour just to journal about what's going on for you right now, or to meditate, in part so that when the next eclipse cycle comes in a couple months, you can look back and see what were the themes in your life and tie in those patterns and reflections. I will also mention that there are many indigenous cultures in North America that to be outside during an eclipse is a time of making yourself vulnerable to potentially challenging or dangerous energies. A lot of us love to watch a lunar eclipse from start to finish. I mean, my dad was an astronomy professor, and we would drive for hours with sleeping bags in the middle of the night and drink a cup of hot cocoa to watch one from beginning to end. There's literally less that I love more than that. But it's also, many cultures think that that's exposing us to vulnerable, shifty energies and could be of concern. So I like to mention that because we don't hear that much in our Western culture. So specifically astrologically, solar eclipses, I want to think about them as I want you to think about them as ways that we can make the unconscious conscious, that we can bring our inner realm forward externally a little bit more. Think about it. The sun is the energy we extend out into the world. When we're looking at your birth chart or your natal chart, your astrological chart, your sun sign is associated with the energy you put out in the world. And your moon sign is associated with your internal energy or your subconscious energy. And during a solar eclipse, the sun, the external energy, is shadowed by the moon, the internal energy. So I think of it energetically in the same way. Right? The moon energy, the internal energy, is eclipsing the external energy. It's coming forth more. So this is a beautiful time to do some journaling and some meditation and to really listen to that inner voice, especially for those of you that are not used to doing that, especially for those of you that like, I do it a lot myself, that don't listen to that inner voice as much as you know you need to. And I see a couple nods. So I know there's some of us on here. We all do it sometimes. So if you've been feeling that, if you've been moving through the world and feeling like you're not listening to that little inner voice enough, the eclipse is a time the solar eclipse is a time it's going to be loud and proud and out in front. So solar eclipses are this time that we can really cultivate that inner voice, let it come out into our awareness so that we know how to listen to it better and navigate. And through making that subconscious more conscious in our lives, maybe we receive new ideas about ourselves, about our purpose, about what we're extending out into the world, and can change our reality and our way of being in the world accordingly. Solar eclipses tend to always bring energy and ideas that are normally buried away out into the light to help us understand, past experiences. Like I related that experience of like childhood. I'm having dental surgery in 2 days. And what my epiphany was that I had some dental procedures when I was little that like had brought up all these feelings, and I'm having all these feelings about this procedure, which I shouldn't be. And it was this connection. It was like, oh, this past experience is informing this current experience, right? So that sounds very mundane, dental surgery, whatever, but I'm telling you, I was having like a total like revelation in the car, like tears, like, yeah, like all tapped into like some energy. So, and it was unexpected, right? Like I wasn't like sitting there like, what is this all about? Like it just sort of came to me like a lightning bolt. So those light bulbs tend to pop on. And in solar eclipse times, they tend to be about what's in the subconscious? What do we need to unearth here to learn from? So again, with this in mind, I really encourage you to carve out time to be with yourself and to listen to yourself. For some of you, that's, doing some yoga and then sitting in meditation afterwards, or having a cup of tea and lighting a candle and journaling, or taking a walk in the woods by yourself, whatever it looks like for you. Create, even if it's just 20 or 30 minutes, to let your inner self speak and really, truly listen to that voice. And also allow yourself to be open to that energy. Sometimes those insights that we tuck away can unearth emotions as they rise to the surface. So it's another reason to really practice being gentle and taking care of yourself. And that's also part of the transformation process. Like that's the gift of growth that comes when we actively connect with this eclipse energy and tap into it. I recognize that might not be possible for all of us to like sit down for an hour at 7 a.m. tomorrow and tap into the eclipse energy exactly when it's happening. But tonight or tomorrow evening, like anytime within 24 hours surrounding the eclipse, that energy is really going to be present. And really anytime this week, that energy is still going to be there for us and sort of informing us. So I really encourage you to take an opportunity to listen. So the final piece that I want to share is that everything that I've talked about so far, the astronomical, movements of these celestial beings in the galaxy, the astrological general things about any type of eclipse, the specific things about the solar eclipse, bringing the inner realms outer. Well, all of these phenomena are always unique every time they happen because they're flavored by the zodiac signs that they happen to occur within the constellation. So as Victoria shared, it's a Scorpio moon, and Victoria has a Scorpio moon. So Victoria is going to have a really special connection with this, but we all are going to be experiencing these things. That's one of the things about eclipses, is that we each have unique personal experiences based on where these planets and signs fall in our chart, but there's also sort of collective themes that happen. So I mentioned that we're in the Taurus and Scorpio axis right now, and the new moon eclipse tomorrow is going to be, solar eclipse is going to be with a Scorpio moon and a Scorpio sun. We're in like Scorpio moment. The Taurus and Scorpio nodes, that axis, is astrologically speaking, the themes are all about resources and power. So things like money and property and assets and survival and physical stuff, physical attachments, embodiment, stability. And these signs, these constellations, Taurus and Scorpio, are sitting on the lunar nodes of our ecliptic plane. They started sitting there in January of 2022, January 18th to be precise, and they'll remain there through July of 2023, next summer. So the start of this year to next summer, those lunar nodes, the South Node and the North Node, are related to these constellations, Taurus and Scorpio, which are the axis of resources and power, survival, money, assets, property, soil, fuel, physical things, physical attachment, physical materials, stuff, and stability. And so I think about this on a collective level and what has been the conversation in the news for a lot of this year, right? Like supply chain disruption, physical stuff. The eclipse is shaking that up. The markets, the inflation, the like interest rates, like this has been a topic of conversation on the collective, at least in the States and in parts of Europe and a lot of parts of the world, because we're all tied together with that global economy. So as I was reflecting on the eclipses in the spring and now these eclipses, it just seems like we're all feeling that influence collectively. So we're also feeling it personally. And that's going to be something that shifts and changes, based on what our signs are and also, what's going on in our life, kind of practically speaking. But I invite you to think about, before you think about this coming eclipse, think about what were the themes and events in your life back in April and May. What was happening for you at the last eclipse cycle? What events were going on in your life? What changes transpired around that time? Maybe little seeds got planted that you're able to reflect back and say, oh, look, that was a bigger change or something. So I invite you to think about that first. What came up for you in late April to mid-May in the last eclipse cycle, which was also in this Taurus Scorpio axis? Were there things about money or physical stuff or stability? Scorpio also is a really deep sign. It's a fixed water sign. There's a lot of deep emotions. It's emotionally and I'd say even psychically really intense. It's a time that our primal instinct and our unconscious intuition really, really tends to stand forth. It's also a time where like there's a lot of connection to ancestors. So if you're thinking about your great grandma, she's been coming through, you've been reminded of her like pumpkin pie that she makes at Thanksgiving, or thinking about loved ones that you've lost. Like obviously this is the season for that, but Scorpio is really tied into that energy. And again, death and rebirth. So with death and rebirth, I reflect a lot about this, that when we lose something, we can feel grief around it, but it tends to open doors for what's next to come. And if we have trust and faith in the process and even a bit of gratitude, then the things we lose, whether they're beliefs that we're really attached to and we have to let go of for our own growth, or maybe we lose our job and then turns out it's because there's a better job waiting for us, or maybe we lose like a partner and then turns out, oh, there's this like even better partner waiting for us, or whatever it looks like. Just trusting in that cycle, like that death always comes with rebirth. Like the things that we put into the compost are what make the beautiful flowers blossom in the springtime. So just remembering that cycle, like returning to our garden and that compost. I'm dropping some questions in the chat, and I'm also going to send this out with the recording email, but you might want to copy these down or think about these. These are some of the specific Scorpio influence, as well as general eclipse questions that I pose to you as reflections. If you're able to carve out some time to, listen to that inner voice and you want some guides or some prompts to check in with that, think about what's being catalyzed in your life right now. What are the things that you're starting to see the, embers of a fire emerge, that spark is happening? What are the truths that you're seeing revealed in this time? Or they're, sometimes it can be really dramatic. Like sometimes, I partly joke and I also feel heartbroken when I say this, but eclipse seasons are a lot of times when people find out their partners have been hiding something from them, or, like cheating on them or something. Oftentimes like eclipses reveal that truth because they're really good at illuminating what's in the shadows. What are the emotions that you're feeling right now? Scorpio is going to make them feel really deep and really strong. Eclipses are going to make those really deep, strong emotions override your logic settings in your brain. So be prepared to just be like running on emotional autopilot, and prepare yourself with the self-care to keep in balance, and to, practice as much restraint, respond rather than react as much as you can. What do you feel in your life is kind of pulling apart? What's not working right now? Like what are you feeling already the tensions of, or the cracks in the foundation? And envision what you would like to see in that place. What would you like to actively build or create in the place of the places that feel like they're have a shaky foundation? Again, death and rebirth. Things sometimes have to fall apart in order for new things to emerge. And I also think about that on a collective level. If we're seeing like the global economy collapse, but we all want a more sustainable, vibrant economy that considers Mother Earth and all of her people as, then like sometimes things have to fall, and difficult they may be, and long-term they may be, but that's a soapbox. But I've just been thinking about it a lot because these themes are affecting us collectively and not just personally. Where are, Taurus, especially attachment, physical attachment, relational attachment? What are there some attachments in your life that maybe aren't feeling as healthy or stable? What are there relationships that you're giving more to than you're getting from? Are there places you can let go of those attachments and let them fall away to make room for something new to grow in their place? What are you holding on to that you can let go of? I'd had a conversation with a fellow herbalist, a girlfriend of mine, at the conference this weekend, and we were talking about like our pandemic pudge and the clothes we used to wear in the before times, and that we've just like been looking at them in our closets with resentment. And we were like, we're cleaning our closets. We don't want to see we got like new fresh clothes that we feel good in, and just like little anecdote, like things that we'd been holding on to that don't serve us, and it's time to let go. So maybe there's a drawer in your kitchen that it's time to clean the clutter out of, or maybe there are, some books that it's time to donate to the library or something like that. What are you holding on to that you don't really need or isn't really serving you that you can let go of? And also the Taurus Scorpio axis in the concept of resources and money and assets, we tend to think about debts a lot too. And I think of that in, financial monetary terms, but also in energetic terms and relational terms. So do you have any friends or relationships or people or yourself that you owe something to? Is there sort of a debt or an apology or a conversation or something that you owe someone that you've been putting off that you can redeem, you can, give forth during this time? Or similarly, are there things that you're owed, an apology, or someone borrowed your favorite sweater and they haven't given it back, or things like that? We can't necessarily ask like our exes for the apologies that we all deserve from them, but you know what I mean? Like there may be conversations that it's worth saying like, hey, I am feeling this way, and like, return my sweater, damn it, or whatever it looks like in your life. But those are some of the themes that tend to rise up during this time for solar eclipses. So tomorrow, 6:49 a.m., new moon in Scorpio, 7 a.m., the partial solar eclipse is taking place. I hope that you've gotten some inspiration tonight for how to navigate and how to work with it and how to glean some good tools. I'll send a follow-up email when the recording is done processing with these questions, and also a couple other little handouts that hopefully will bring you some inspiration and some guidance and some fun during this time. I'm also dropping my email in the chat again, moonmedicine@sagemountain.com. If there was a question on your heart that we didn't get to cover, or you're reflecting in the next day or two and you want to revisit a concept that we talked about, feel free to email me there, and maybe I'll see. So I'm going to hopefully do one of these maybe for the lunar eclipse too, because I love circling up with all of you and in our presence together, even if you're watching the recording, being able to just honor these events, because these are, happen a couple times a year, but they're significant in the world and in our hearts. And so I wish you a lot of peace and blessing and grace through this period of time. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon. And I hope is a wonderful, insightful, transformative time for you tomorrow. So sending you lots of blessings, and thanks for sharing your time with me tonight. Happy new moon, everyone.